Hey, good morning, guys. I'm joining you to tell you how much the law totally fucking sucks. So, there's all these legislators, and they write all these laws on paper, and then they vote on them, and then we're supposed to follow them. But in order to follow them, we have to know what they are. How do we know what they are? Well, we could read the actual laws, but to pass so many of them, and there's so many millions of pages, that's impossible. So, then the news picks up on it, and then the news starts telling us what the law is, but that's really just a brief interpretation. We could go to a law library. That sounds like a lot of work. We could go online, and there's actually a lot of resources online that have the law, but it's still really hard to find. We could use something like Google, which has a really great search engine, but there's a problem with that. And that, I think, is the biggest problem. And it relates to the news and the media, who bring us the laws and tell us what the laws are. And that's this. The law is broken down into codes. Every single law has like a number and a letter and everything else to it, right? Section 2403.A.1. Whatever, right? Title 26, Internal Revenue Code. So, there's some articles coming out now that Biden is raising the minimum wage law to $15, and I'm like, knowing what I know about the tax law, I wonder if there's anything about the minimum wage laws that it really only applies to a limited group of people. So I want to find out, who does this actually apply to? So I go to Google and I start looking for minimum wage laws, federal minimum wage laws, and all that comes up are a bunch of articles. Articles on all of these laws saying, oh yeah, in 1938 there was a federal minimum wage act and this and that, and who does the federal minimum wage law apply to? Well, it applies to the private sector and the public sector and all this shit. And these are really just interpretations. Because at the end of the day, I can guarantee you, once I find this code, it does not say this minimum wage shall apply to the private sector and the public sector, as this article said. It might, or at least they might, I don't want to say legally imposing it, but that might be how they wrote it and what they intended, but I guarantee you those aren't the words that they used. That's an interpretation by the media, right? So, the problem with this is people who want to know what the actual law is, whenever they have these articles, they don't even link to the law. Now, Cornell Law University has a really great resource that's got all the federal laws. Congress has a website where you can download the shit, but it's a PDF. It's terrible. You can't really search it. It's almost like as if you picked up an entire book. And I mean, there's a find feature, but it's not much use for dozens of reasons I won't get into. But so Cornell Law University has put this together where it's actually really easy to search, and you can find things pretty easily. For free. There are other resources like Lex Law and all these other things that attorneys use, but you got to pay for those a lot, like $1,000 a month or something ridiculous. But Cornell Law University is really great. The problem is there's still lots and lots and lots of laws, and their search algorithm isn't probably as good as Google or DuckDuckGo or any of these organizations that spend millions of dollars making sure that they have a really great search algorithm. So when you use those, you get articles and articles and articles talking about the exact specific thing you're looking for, except none of them link to the code. So why is it that all of these news organizations are reporting on the law, they're telling you what the law is, but they never even, forget a link, they never even cite a code that you could go and look up yourself in the code of laws, in the book of codified laws. It's not there. That really pisses me off. That's something that the media needs to change. But what I want to tell you is whenever you read something especially about the law, don't take it as fact until you read the law yourself, because a lot of these guys, a lot of the news isn't even, they haven't even read the law. They're not lawyers. Most of the times they haven't read the law. A lot of times what they do is they'll go to a press conference and some politician will tell them, oh yeah, it applies to this, it applies to that. And that's just propaganda. That has nothing to do with the language or the letter of the law. You always have to go back to the law. And start calling the news out on this shit. Anytime you see an article telling you, hey, there's a new law, blah, 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 ask them, under what authority, under what code is this? What statute authorizes this? What constitutional provision authorizes this? Ask them this. Let them know that you actually care about this stuff, and they will start doing that. So, onto this minimum wage law. What I'm interested to find out, like the income tax only applies to government employees. Or somebody working for, it's interesting, they say somebody working for an instrumentality of the government or something like that. And what that basically means is a corporation that was maybe set up privately but operates for the government. So, for example, it might be something like, what's it called? The big military industrial complex companies, where, you know, their only customer is the government. They only exist to serve the government. That might be considered, you know, a private yet taxable organization. Don't quote me on that. But to the same effect, is that what they mean when they say the federal minimum wage? Because there's no provision in the Constitution for the federal government to set a minimum wage. But of course, if they have a contract with somebody, then they can enforce whatever they want, right? Like, if I have a prepaid cell phone plan, then it's already paid for. They can't just make up some rules. But we had an agreement as to what I'm going to pay. But if I have a contract, and that contract says they can change the price or they can regulate the price, then they can change the price whenever they want. So if you have a contract with the federal government, that's where that comes into play. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. A lot of states, especially states that have the state income tax, their income tax is a piggyback on the federal income tax. So when a state imposes an income tax, basically all they say is, and they say it right there, you know, this word means whatever it means by the federal government. So if the federal government changes their definition, then the state law also changes, without having to actually change the state law. No law gets passed at the state level, but the meaning of the law changes because the federal law changed. So in that way, what I'm interested to find out is the same thing happening with the minimum wage laws? Are these being imposed only on people with contracts? Now, there are a lot more people who have contracts with the state government than they do with the federal government. Anytime you apply for a business license, that's a contract with the state, and that basically gives them control over your business. And a lot of people will say, yeah, but you need a business license in order to operate. I don't believe that's true, and I know some people, I don't have any business licenses with my business, but of course I don't have a brick and mortar store that the cops can come and knock on and say, hey, get a license or we're going to lock your doors. I'm all online. But there are some people I know who have had brick and mortar businesses, who have refused to get business licenses, who have been threatened by the government, and insisted they don't need a license, and have been left to operate their business without getting shut down. So I don't believe that everybody needs to have a business license like that. But again, that's something I want to look more into, and see what the actual terms are on this, because a lot of this information and research has been done on the income tax, and I'm wondering, and I know the same thing applies with driver's licenses from my own personal experience, and I want to know to what extent these same shenanigans are going on with employment, business licenses, and all this other nonsense. I will say this. Some of this stuff is actually imposed by third parties. So, for example, with banks, sometimes if you, let's say, for example, you want to apply for a bank account under the name of a business with a DBA, sometimes the bank will require that you show them a business license. Or if you want to apply for a credit card processing, they want to see a business license. It might not be required by law. It's probably not. Especially if you're not required to have a license to operate the business. But if the bank is telling you, hey, you're not going to be able to process credit cards unless you go get that contract with the government, that's the bank's right to do that, because that's their private policy. Whether it's a misinterpretation of the law or not, you can't sue them and say they're misinterpreting the law, because at the end of the day, even if the law doesn't say that, they could still require that. That's their private business. And I know this gets into the whole protection of Twitter and all that shit, but not that I like it, but let's be honest about what the law is, at least, or at least what's morally correct. Even if someone does something that we don't like, as I say, I may not like what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. We have to understand what is morally right, what is not. Anyway, guys, I'm going to try to do some more research on that and come up with some answers. But until then, I'll catch you next time. Taxation is theft.